Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Hearth. It's good of you to join us. Today we have the start of an adventure. A Homer's Odyssey of lost stories, if you will. A story that, despite its magnitude, ended up in my care, among all the other fables and tales, lost to time. Naturally, we won't get through the whole thing today. We're only scratching the surface, but not to worry, there's plenty more to come, and we'll see this one through to the end, I promise you. So, sit back, enjoy yourself, and let's get started. The man carried nothing but the sword on his back, a gargantuan thing that would seem impossible to use for anyone but him. A massive young man, strength was the first word that came to mind when laying eyes on him. Sadly, the only eyes here were sitting in the bellies of the ravens amassed nearby. He waded through the mud and the corpses, his steps deceptively gentle for his size. Wrecked carriages lay scattered along the road nearby. The stench of dead flesh filled the air like a smog, and the flies certainly didn't help. Another hopeful caravan, ambushed on its way to haven. For a place with such a promising name, reaching it seemed borderline impossible. He stooped, examining the bodies. Judging from the smell, they had been dead for a few days. The bodies that were intact had suffered deep, ragged wounds. The rest had been ripped apart and tossed around the area. Nothing had been taken, at least that ruled out the cursed. Things were hard enough without Felvians killing each other. He caught sight of a tangle of smaller bodies near one of the carriages. He sighed, closing his eyes. He took a deep breath. That sight never got easier. There was something just plain wrong about seeing them. He stood, turning away. He rooted around in the wreckage until he found his prize, an intact shovel. Setting his sword on the ground, he went to work. The sun was beginning to set by the time he placed the last marker. He had made them from bits and pieces of the carriages. He hoped it wasn't disrespectful. He overlooked his makeshift graveyard, whispering a short prayer. If only he had known their names. He would have to let the light sort them out. He looked up at the darkening sky. He couldn't keep going. It would be dark soon, and given this wreckage, there were a lot of Shadowkin nearby. He scanned the wrecked caravan, sighing again. He hoped this wasn't disrespectful either. They slithered and crawled and slunk out of the darkness, drawn to the scent of living flesh and the glow of flame. There was no moon or stars tonight. The clouds had covered the sky as if to aid their hunt. The Shadowkin had an innate sense for life. It was why they were so effective at snuffing it out. Each one of the light's creations carried a scent to it, and the Shadowkin's sole desire was to wipe that scent from the world. They had destroyed the caravan nearly a week prior, on a night just like this. The bodies had begun to decay, creating that invigorating death stench that they loved nearly as much as the metallic smell of blood. Yet now the smell of life cut through, a soft, sweet odor that they couldn't bear. At least it wasn't as strong as the caravan had been. This couldn't be more than 2 light things. The flames' flickering light came from inside a makeshift barrier, comprised of the caravan's wrecked carriages pulled into a rough circle. The Shadowkin crept closer, some slithering on their bellies, others crawling on grotesque, misshapen legs. They were completely silent. They didn't even disturb the dust beneath them. Such supernatural stealth was yet another reason they could destroy so efficiently. They would not be noticed until they desired to be. Yet, as they crept closer to the wall of carriages, a strange sense of unease began to grow among them. Many of them took a moment to smell the air again, to make sure that life scent was really what they were smelling. It was. There was no doubt about that. It was the smell of a light thing. Yet there was something else. Something they had never smelled before. Something that made them feel uncertain. Impossible. There was nothing wrong. There couldn't be. The Shadowkin ignored their doubt, stealing their killing instincts. Something was living in this camp. It would not live much longer. Slowly, quietly, the first Shadowkin began its climb over the wall, followed by its brethren. It made its way over the top, still unable to shake the growing uneasiness. And, as it stared down into the camp, laying eyes on the source of the life scent sitting at the fire, that uneasiness exploded into shock, confusion, and something the Shadowkin had never felt before. Fear. It was facing a contradiction. It was a man of some kind, a light thing. The life scent confirmed it. It couldn't be anything else. Yet the Shadowkin couldn't see a man. It saw a beast staring back at it. A beast soaked in the strange scent it could not identify. That strange scent that was somehow terrifying. They could all feel it. It was like a pressure forcing them back. To them, this light thing was a monster beyond even their comprehension. One of the more reckless Shadowkin threw itself at him. Beast or man, it wouldn't matter when he was dead. In an impossibly quick movement, the man hefted the massive hunk of metal at his side and split the Shadowkin in 2. The now separated halves flying in different directions from the force of his swing. In that moment, as black liquid seeped from the corpse, the remaining Shadowkin learned what that strange, terrifying scent was, why they felt such an unnatural fear as they approached. That man's body was soaked with the scent of Shadowkin blood. This was impossible. Every night, these Shadowkin descended on the world. Every night, they wiped more of the light's mark away. And in all their nights, they had never bled, never been wounded. Yet this man, if man was still a fitting term for him, had freed enough of their blood to mix its scent with his own. For the first time in their lives, the Shadowkin paused. For the first time in their lives, they were afraid to attack. The man shouldered his weapon, ready for battle. For a moment, there was complete silence. He took a single step forward, and the horde of Shadowkin hurled themselves at him. A desperate attempt to kill their fear, to rectify their world where they were the ones to be afraid of. The moon emerged from its hiding place as the fighting concluded, shedding its silver light on the scene. The fire had been trampled, ash and smoking wood scattered around the campsite. The black blood of the Shadowkin was ankle deep, nearly submerging the corpses it flowed from. The man clambered over the makeshift wall, black blood soaking his armor and his blade. A trail of black liquid followed behind him, staining the ground he walked on. He couldn't sleep there anymore, but there was an upside. He was now soaked in enough blood to keep any Shadowkin from even approaching him. He could continue his travels, at least. Although he would need to find somewhere to bathe. There were very little clean bodies of water left on the mainland. Nearly everything had been infected by the Dark's curse. The curse seeped out of the Shadowkin, warping everything around them. 9 times out of 10, any lake or pond was now a basin of poisonous sludge. Yet, he managed to find one clean river the following day. Clean water probably meant that a priest had passed through. They were the only ones with the ability to cleanse the curse. It was possible they were still camped somewhere along the river. Regardless, he was thankful. After a long drink and a longer rinse, he sat down along the bank of the river, cleaning the dried blood from his armor. Shadowkin blood didn't behave the same as human blood. When it was fresh, it behaved as a liquid, and while it was a bit sticky, it wasn't very difficult to remove. When it dried, however, it took on the consistency of tar, which made it a much more tedious process. Many a time he had been forced to cut his hair after a particularly messy fight with Shadowkin. This time, thankfully, he had kept the blood out of his hair, although it had taken quite a bit of scrubbing to get it off of his face and neck. His armor and sword would be a bit easier, but it would still take a while. He scooped some sediment from the bottom of the river. He didn't have any sand, and he didn't have any grease or polish of any kind, so simply cleaning it would have to do. One very rarely came across any usable supplies that weren't owned and closely guarded. The chances of scavenging something for maintaining weapons and armor were next to zero. Recently, he had been lucky enough to trade for some supplies, but had run out several days ago, along with the last of his food and water. He scraped the sediment along his pauldrons, scooping up more as he went. He stayed alert as he cleaned. The Shadowkin may not come out during the day, but that didn't mean he was safe. However, even when his armor was finally free of the black blood again, he still seemed to be alone. Perhaps this place was more isolated than he thought. He dipped his sword in the river, scooping up more sediment. The sword would take a bit longer than the armor, It was so caked in black blood that he could have passed it off as the natural color of the blade. In fact, the first hints of twilight were creeping along the edges of the sky by the time he finished. It had been somewhere near noon when he started cleaning his equipment. He sighed. No matter what he did, he always seemed to travel at night. Maybe he should just stay here for the night. It seemed pretty remote, and his scent was still probably enough to keep the Shadowkin away, even after his bath. Yet he stood, slowly strapping his armor back on, then stooping back down for a quick drink. He hefted his sword, the ache in his legs already returning. What he wouldn't give for a bedroll and a good night's sleep. But he had to keep moving. After all, the sooner he found his destination, the better. Several hours later, he was kicking rocks aside in the dark, stumbling over the ones he missed. He had traded the trees and rivers for a barren wasteland of rocks and dust, although there wasn't nearly enough light to appreciate this drastic change. Not that there was much to appreciate. The silver lining was the empty landscape made Shadowkin easier to handle. Not much for them to hide behind except the night. That said, he hadn't crossed paths with any Shadowkin tonight, something he was thankful for. The river had been a refreshing break, but a break was all it had been. He was hungry, thirsty, and tired. Whether or not he could kill a Shadowkin was moot at this point. He didn't even want to try. He didn't even know how he was supposed to find what he was looking for. He had no light to see by. As if on cue, a twinkle of light pushed through the darkness. He scanned the horizon, trying to find it. He saw it again, a barely perceptible point of light in the distance. He trudged toward it, hoping he wouldn't have to fight anyone to get there. As he got closer, the twinkle turned out to be a lantern, hung atop a pole beside a run-down old building. The building was mostly intact, although the windows and the front door had all been broken in. There were more lanterns inside, all of them lit. He searched the first floor, but there didn't seem to be any signs of a recent visitor. Who had lit these lanterns? The second floor held several empty rooms, although judging from the layout, he guessed that this place was probably an inn at some point. At least, it was intended to be. The lack of furnishings suggested the project was terminated earlier than expected. No matter where in Felvia you were, nothing lasted very long anymore. The room at the end of the hall was the only one with any furnishings. There was a small nightstand, and, to his overwhelming joy, a bed. In a matter of moments, his sword and armor lay on the floor, and he flopped down into the bed. It was heavenly. He muttered a grateful prayer as he buried his face in the pillow. Thinking logically, he needed to get back up. He needed to make sure the building was safe. After all, there were plenty of openings for Shadowkin to get through. He had to find a way to block them all off. But this bed was so comfortable, and he was so tired. He had even stopped worrying about the lanterns. He mumbled another, barely coherent prayer. Surely the light would protect him, just this once. All he wanted was a good night's sleep. Within moments, he was unconscious, snoring softly. An owl landed on the windowsill, staring in at him. It turned to face the dark wasteland outside, and all the lanterns burned a little brighter.